Welcome and thanks for joining us for Two Steps Forward. This is our daily Bible study that my wife and I do together. We're thankful that you're joining us today, whether this is your first time or whether you've been with us for all 347 episodes.
I wonder if anyone has
done all 347.
I think so.
I think there's some that have, and there's still a bunch of people at different kind of points along the way. I think people jump into different books that they find interesting.
I also think people have caught on that, typically whatever we do, then there's going to be a sermon series on that book coming.
No one's caught on to that.
No, people have told me I just realized you guys just did Matthew and now we're doing it at church. So they're waiting.
No.
Yeah.
No, although as we've been studying through it, I've thought I would like to do a Daniel. It's not that carefully thought through. It's more reactive. It would be fun to do a Bible. The first 6 chapters of Daniel are just phenomenal narrative. The hardest thing about them is they're not gospel narratives where they're 12 verses. They're the 3 men in the fiery furnaces. There's almost no way to shortcut that thing. It's 30 plus verses or whatever. So, but you just kind of do it. But we are up to Daniel 6, and maybe the most famous part of Daniel's book, which is Daniel in the Lion's Den. If you have not read this yet, please be sure to do so. You can pause now if you need to, but here is my personal summary of Daniel chapter 6. King Darius, is the king...
Cucumber.
Well, I don't know about that, but he's come in and he's from the Medes and Persians, and he came in 536 BC and defeated the Babylonian Empire under the king at the time, Belshazzar. King Darius appointed 120 rulers throughout the kingdom, which are referred to here as satraps. There were 3 administrators over them, and one of them was Daniel. Daniel was so uniquely gifted that Darius placed him over the entire kingdom, and the other administrators became soon jealous of Daniel's success, so they looked for a way to get him to slip up, but they couldn't find anything. They knew their only hope was to find something about the law of God that a God that the king wouldn't like. God as in the God of Israel that the king wouldn't like. These administrators went to the king and, after flattering him for a bit, encouraged him to issue a decree that no one pray to any god except the king, who in ancient times, like the Pharaoh of Egypt, was considered a god of the nation. But no one was supposed to pray to this king, King Darius, for the next 30 days, to no god except this king for the next 30 days. King Darius put the decree into writing. When Daniel heard about the decree, he went home, opened his windows, and prayed facing Jerusalem. He was already in the custom of doing that 3 times a day. When the officials saw Daniel praying, they reported it to the king, and the king was greatly distressed and did everything he could to save Daniel. But the law of the Medes and Persians could not be revoked. The officials came and had Daniel arrested and thrown into the lion's den. And the king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." The king himself came and sealed the stone which was placed over the mouth of the lion's den. King Darius returned to his palace and spent that night without any food or any entertainment or any sleep. He's completely worried about Daniel, and at daybreak the next morning, he runs to the lion's den to see what happened. He calls down to Daniel to see if he's okay. Daniel replied, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight." The king was overjoyed and had Daniel removed from the den. The king then commanded that the men who accused Daniel be thrown into the lion's den along with their women and children, their wives and children. They were all mauled by the lions as soon as they reached the ground. And King Darius wrote to all the nations about his fear and reverence for the God of Daniel. And in the letter, King Darius says that this God is the living God who rescues his people and performs miraculous signs and wonders. Daniel prospered then during the reign of Darius, which is probably, again, we talked about this last time, there's some confusion. Is Darius the Mede the same person as the Cyrus the Persian? Or is he just somebody who was appointed by King Cyrus of Persia? We don't know for sure. Probably doesn't matter. For right now, we'll refer to Darius also as Cyrus of Persia. That's Daniel 6.
This sounds a lot like what happened to Jesus.
Uh-oh, you're already a little bit ahead. You jumped into my 3rd point already.
I did?
But yes, I think it's written in an intentionally foreshadowing type of way.
Yeah. Also...
Which is, what do we call those in the Old Testament?
Types of Christ.
Types of Christ, yes.
Yeah, I had to do a Bible study, a Sunday school lesson on those ones. And each week we talked about a different type of Christ. And the kids would tell me when I was pronouncing things wrong because they went to a Welsh school.
Yeah, they learned them from early on. Yeah.
Referencing VeggieTales, Daniel was the cucumber. And guess what King Darius was?
A big fat tomato.
You're looking at the picture and you can't even tell. He was a piece of asparagus.
That's how well I know. VeggieTales doesn't resonate with me because veggies don't resonate with me.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't even tell. What is that, a pumpkin?
He was a piece of asparagus.
All right. Devotional thought number 1. Unflappable spiritual disciplines. So I say spiritual disciplines intentionally here and not faith. Because I think we have a tendency towards overly internalizing the concept of faith. Like it's just something inside of me, not something that I do. Spiritual disciplines, I think we do recognize as outward manifestations of internal faith. And so when Daniel learned King Darius had been duped, this is the whole thing. Somebody kind of flattered him, stroked his ego, and got him to issue this decree that everybody could only pray to him for the next 30 days. What did Daniel do? He still went home and did what he had been doing every day up until that point, which is he faces out his window towards Jerusalem. And the whole deal is Daniel fears the Lord. And so when you fear the Lord, you don't fear anybody else. Like you're going to fear something in life, but if you fear the Lord who is over everything else, you'll be less afraid of the other things in life that you think might potentially hurt you. Also, as Christians, our worldly fears tend to be driven out by some of the spiritual disciplines that we enact, from prayer to study to worship to Christian community to generosity. Those things provide stability in our lives, and you want to build up those habits so that in times of crisis, you're just ready to do them. Like you're still going to do them. Because, every day you're not necessarily crying out to God to deliver you. But in a sense, every day you do want to be praying to God for some of that, or acknowledging that he could, so that in those crisis moments, like I always teach people, like, yes, I have to teach you to pray right now in a controlled environment, because you're going to have a coworker or a family member in a time of crisis who needs somebody to pray with them. And at that point, I don't want you to say, well, here's Pastor Hines' number. I want you to start praying with them. And when it all starts to fall apart here, Daniel already has this built-in habit of getting on his knees and praying. And he gets arrested for it here, but he's not going to compromise that because he fears the Lord. If you were going to map out your own personal spiritual disciplines from week to week, are you comfortable sharing what that would look like?
What do you mean?
You should read these questions before we go live. I'm saying, like, do you have a rhythm each week for what your spiritual disciplines look like?
Well, in some, I have growth group.
Which is?
Monday nights.
Monday nights for 3 hours.
I have church.
Worship. Which is?
Saturday evening.
Saturday evenings for a couple hours.
Sometimes I'll go to Sunday.
Occasionally on Sunday and holidays.
I listen to my Bible reading in the morning.
Okay, so Bible study each day and Bible readings each day.
I pray before I go to sleep.
Prayer before sleep.
And meals.
And you allow me to pray before meals. Yes, we pray before meals.
And pretty much it.
Okay.
I tithe every month, yeah.
Okay, so you have a tithe worked out. You see, you have Christian community, Christian friends, those kind of encouragements. You've done a lot of reading plans with friends, those types of things, right? So you want to build those into the fact that you're like, I have to come up with this now means that even though you're kind of doing them, you're not completely doing them intentionally. You're doing them sort of just as part of life. Which is okay. You want to get into sort of a non-conscious rhythm of things, but I think at some point in time you do want to do an inventory, which is sort of what we've been trying to encourage people to do with, we worked through our congregational pledge cards yesterday, but thinking okay, how much time and energy and study and do I dedicate to the Lord? So building in a rhythm of, okay, I pray this way in the morning and in the evening, or for Daniel, it's 9 a.m., it's noon, it's 3 p.m. It's just non-negotiable. He's going to do it every day. He's not going to hide it, even though he does it relatively in private. But these are non-negotiables. He's not going to, like, just because something, I've got a lot of business to attend to today. He's like second in command in all of the empire. And it's like, well, are you willing to cut an hour here or there out of your prayer life? Like, no, I want to pray for 3 hours every day or something like that, And so building those into high priority in your life means that you can face crises like, okay, I'm going to get killed for this, but you can still do it with a level of confidence. And I think that one of the coolest things in all of this is this, I'll get into it in the next point. So we're already kind of in devotional thought number 2. Weak and sleepless rulers. Weak, W-E-A-K, and sleepless rulers. So Darius clearly has some kind of level of affection for Daniel. Not only is he a likable character and he's a man of integrity, but he also is his most trusted and wise advisor. So he doesn't want to see any harm come upon him. And it actually, the whole situation, when we went through Matthew, it reminds me a little bit of Pontius Pilate, right? You have a guy who knows what is right, but is desperate to look good in front of his other people.
I think Pontius Pilate would have been happy if Jesus would have rescued himself.
Yeah, I think he would have. I think that's a good point.
Like, there's no blood on his hands.
He doesn't have guilt on this, and it even indicates that he was maybe right about his evaluation of his character. But at the end of the day, their functional God is the approval of the people around me, And Darius did not want to look bad. He did not want to go back on his decree or get deposed. We already talked about, how volatile leadership in those days sort of was. So the ironic thing in the whole deal is Daniel sleeps perfectly fine in a den of lions. Darius has the best bed in the entire planet on Earth at that time, I'm sure. And yet he can't get a wink of sleep.
Do you think Daniel cuddled up to him to keep warm? To the lions?
To the lions?
Since their mouths were closed?
No, I don't think he did that.
Oh.
I don't know, but that's... Yeah. So the way, by the way, that if you're wondering what this would have looked like, at that time, typically what you had was a cave with a dividing wall that was raised or lowered. So you'd put somebody in there, and then you'd raise the wall, like this fake wall, and you would be starving lions up until that point, and then they would eat them alive.
I see.
The animals...
Where did they get these lions?
Well, wherever people still get lions today.
The jungle,
the circuses.
the mighty jungle.
Yeah. So, interesting. So it's also an interesting detail that when Daniel gets out and they throw in the advisors and their families, they all get mauled. Like, that they're not hungry.
Are they taking these cubs from northern Africa back up to Persia?
Yes, probably. Yes. From Southeast Asia or from Africa or wherever. We don't know exactly what the climate was at that time, but the climate that you would get lions
Southeast
from.
Asia, those are tigers.
But we know, for instance, that when you get to, Solomon was known for having his interest in animals, his interest in plants, and had them, shipped from all around the world. And he had, a study of these things. He probably had a zoo.
Cool. I've never heard that before.
So, and certainly Babylon, which was this metropolitan area, would have had the best stuff from around the world. So, yes, I think they had access to all these things for multiple generations. The question here, what are the things that cause you to most lose sleep at night? And why logically shouldn't that be a fear for you as a child of God?
Not as much anymore as maybe when I was in school, but the criticism of my superiors.
Okay. Criticism of superiors, not peers, you said, right?
Right, yeah.
Like a teacher or...
Yeah, like if my boss wanted to talk to me, oh my gosh, and if he didn't tell me what he wanted to talk to me about, and I just had to wait till whatever.
Yeah.
I had this it wasn't a conflict. An anesthesiologist got upset with me for not providing information to her that she thought I should have during patient care when she was not available. And instead of speaking to me, she called my boss and said, Adrian did this and this and this and didn't make me aware of it at all. my license says I don't have to, but there's we practice in a model where like we communicate in a team environment.
Yeah.
Okay. So then he calls me and he tells me this, and I'm like, I have to go find her immediately and talk to her face to face, because if this doesn't get resolved, I would not get a wink of sleep.
Yes.
You know?
It's sitting over me or hanging over me right now, and it needs to be resolved. Yeah.
So I talked to her face to face, and I mean, I apologized for, her, I don't know how to say it. Like, I didn't do anything wrong. I just cared for a patient, and she didn't have the information that she wanted because she wasn't there. But I just said in the future, I would kind of default to over communication so that we don't run into an issue like this again.
But your basic point is that had you not had that conversation, you would have lost sleep that night.
And even then, we went out to dinner that night, and I talked about it for like 40 minutes until my other manager texted me and said like, oh, hey, this is my second manager. I heard what happened and you did everything right. Like, I needed some reassurance that it was all fine.
It was completely occupying you.
Yes.
So, I mean,
the answer, yes, is some stuff, work stuff.
And the Christian solution would have been if you trusted, so like if I fear the Lord more, I'll fear other people less, including my superiors. Like, who's the one that gave me skills to do this job and the training to do this job and be in this opportunity, in this position? It was God.
Yeah, and the ability to make these decisions without...
Yes, so if I appropriately feared the Lord, I probably would fear these individuals less, right? So, I mean, same thing with me. It's generally like work related. I just beat somebody up in a dream the other day. And it was,
sounds healthy.
I know it clearly is not.
Was it me?
It was no, but it was. I mean, it's it's that, and it was just frustration over criticisms and stuff like that. Kind of.
The weird thing is, well, I don't know. You don't even really have a boss, so like, who is really gonna are you just afraid of members getting upset with you?
No, I think it's in general. Well, yeah, maybe your church, but it's also those outside the church, and it's also just like fear of poor performance. Like if things aren't going well, the first person that you might want to point the finger at would be like, well, why aren't you doing something about this? Why aren't you doing this better? That's not like any one person saying it. It's not even illegitimate, but it's like, yeah, I do have a responsibility. And if I perform poorly, even if they're not like blaming me, it feels like, oh, I'm being criticized, So yes, fearing the Lord, you'll fear others less. And then the third devotional thought, emerging from a would-be tomb. This is what you alluded to earlier. So like without question, the Spirit, and the longer you read the Bible, the more this becomes just kind of obvious.
Honestly, I thought about it more, not even with the tomb, but with like the Pontius Pilate. And also like trying to find some rule that Daniel was breaking.
Yes.
Or Jesus was breaking when there really wasn't any.
What that is then is there's universal principles and what are called archetypes of this is what happens in this situation, almost irrespective of who the individual is, because this is how humans operate. And this is how God's truth confronts humanity and how they react to it. But the parallels between Daniel and Christ here are just super interesting and again, the Spirit is recording this in such a way so that I don't know that you can teach it unless the ultimate fulfillment of the story finds itself in Jesus. But you have a man who is essentially captured while he's praying to God, right? Just like Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's a guy who is thrown into a stone den that is supposed to be his tomb. He is a guy, that tomb or that den is sealed by a local ruler. You have interested parties who on a subsequent day are running out to the tomb. I know that on Easter Sunday morning, the women weren't running out to expect to find Jesus alive. But point being, you have people following up to a would-be tomb. This all functions as a foreshadowing of Jesus, who... The reason that Jesus is the ultimate fulfillment, like the greatest fulfillment, is that he was not spared from the lion's mouths, but at the cross he sort of leaps into the lion's mouths in our place for our sins. I think evaluating Daniel, have you seen any flaws in Daniel in his character at this point.
Well, no, but I don't know him that well. I'm sure there's something.
Appreciate your honesty.
He doesn't eat meat.
You don't know him like Shadrach does.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think I once heard it put like this, that Daniel and Joseph are the two characters in the Bible other than Jesus, that like we know no one other than Jesus is perfect, but those are the two guys who are probably the closest. But even Joseph, I think you can squabble with that, because I think there's probably some character issues, or at least early on in late life. But Daniel is... I think probably the better answer is Daniel and John the Baptist. Even John the Baptist expresses some doubts at times, but Daniel doesn't seem to do that.
What about that guy who was the king and then he went and rebuilt Jerusalem?
The guy who was the king and then he... Oh, are you talking about Nehemiah?
Yeah.
Nehemiah wasn't a king. He was a cupbearer
to
the king Artaxerxes. Yeah.
Yes.
He was a very good leader. He was also not perfect, but somebody that... There's certain obvious things about, for instance, Peter that we don't want to emulate.
Right.
But it's hard to find something in Daniel that you wouldn't just hold up and say like, yeah, we should try to emulate that.
Yeah. I don't know. I also feel like only very specific things are written about him.
Yeah, correct. That's true. We don't actually have a biography of Daniel. So he's clearly not the Son of God. He is a sinner that's saved by grace. But I do think it's worth noting, not necessarily ranking, but worth noting that God positions certain people for different roles, and it's usually character reasons why. So like Daniel is bright, but why is he bright? God gives him information about how to interpret dreams. Is that really bright, or is that just special revelation from God? The biggest thing to him was he feared the Lord.
Yeah.
That's what made him so effective, is he fears the Lord.
What about Enoch? Is he in that short list?
We know even less about Enoch's biography than Daniel, so. All right, do you want to pray, or would you like me to?
It's okay.
Which is okay for me to do it?
Sure.
Okay. Father, thank you for our time in your word here today. Thank you for examples like Daniel. We know he's not perfect. We know he's a sinner saved by grace, but he does certainly show us what fearing the Lord looks like. It means that we're not afraid of the things or the rulers or the lions of this world. Nothing's going to stop us from praying to you. Nothing's going to stop us from coming to you. And actually, even when we're in those difficult situations, we trust that you're often going to shut the mouths of lions that otherwise try to hurt us. So we have a tremendous amount of confidence in what you have done for us and what you will do for us, and we ask that you help us live out of that confidence and faith. May it glorify your name. Amen. Thanks for studying with us today. We will see you next time for Daniel chapter 7.